the precursor for forgiveness is compassion. The precursor to compassion is empathy. Full healing for the victim can only happen if you are able to forgive. And I'm looking into his eyes trying to find the murderer. And I didn't. I was able to climb through his eyes and touch his humanity, that I got the spark in him was no different than the spark in me. And when I left the prison, my stride was much bouncier leaving than the one I walked in. The forgiveness can be extremely freeing. He said, as you were leaving, he looked at me and says, Daddy, that's a special person. I killed his one and only son. Not only has he forgiven me, he's offered me a job. I'm not worthy of it, but I'm going to work at it. And my grandfather says he never said that to me. He always told me, Daddy, I'm not going to make it in prison. That meeting shifted him, and he applied himself and continues to do so.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Resilient Purpose Podcast. I know I did not say therapy talk, but we have decided to change the episode title because as we were starting this episodes or these segments, we come to the realization that we're talking about more things than just therapy, and that we wanted to really put an emphasis on creating resilience, creating resilient communities, creating resilient people. And we are hoping that each and every episode that we bring to you guys is one step towards building more resilience in the people that watch this. So we really feel that the Resilient Purpose Podcast is more appropriate of a title. So we hope that you will share this transition and let people know. And as you will see that the lovely people of Dean Screens has created this new shirt, bringing to light the new name. And so we hope you will enjoy. Today, I am bringing a really important topic to the Resilient Purpose Podcast. We are meeting with Azim Khamisa. He is experienced an incredible tragedy years ago where he lost his son to gang violence. Son was delivering pizza as part of his weekend job as a college student, and he was shot and killed by a gang member as part of an initiation. And what is incredible about this is not the fact that that event happened, but that he responded to this tragedy with forgiveness. And we're going to really talk about his journey to forgiveness, the great things that he is doing as a part of his foundation, the efforts that he has done towards his new journey of forgiveness and helping society turn to forgiveness.
Our Friday Making a Difference report, and the story of a man whose capacity for forgiveness is astonishing. He suffered the worst loss a parent can ever face, and yet he decided to turn his grief into something positive for himself and a troubled young man. Here's NBC's John Larson.
A documentary began the story like this.
14-year-old Tony Hicks shot and killed 20-year-old Tariq Khamisa.
A 14-year-old murders a promising young college student for the cost of a pizza and becomes the youngest child in California history charged as an adult with murder and gets life in prison.
It was like a nuclear bomb going off in my heart.
Azim Khamisa, the father of the victim, buried his only son Tariq, according to their Muslim custom. He climbed down into the muddy grave. It had been raining, and they lowered his son's body, wrapped in a white cloth, down into his open arms.
Yeah, I didn't want to live there alone. I stayed there a long time. When something bad happens, you can stop that bad from happening to other people.
But when he finally came up, he did something remarkable.
It is wrong to lie, to cheat.
First, he forgave the family of the killer.
It was a defining moment in my life. Only through that forgiveness,
which in turn helped Azim start the Tariq Khamisa Foundation, speaking together to more than 1 million children about the real pain of violence.
And sometimes it scars the soul forever.
Then, Azim visited Tony Hicks, the killer, who had never had a father, and forgave him too.
His forgiveness wasn't something I expected.
Now Azim is lobbying to have Tony released from prison early, like he was his own son. And when he gets out of prison, what do you hope for him?
We'll have a job for him at the foundation.
So you're going to hire him?
Absolutely.
This is the killer of your son?
Yes.
Tony says now he knows what a real father is.
I had a man forgive me for taking the life of his son.
And he will work for that father, and for many who maybe never had fathers, someday, whether he gets out early or not. John Larson, NBC News, San Diego, California.
If I dial back 26 years ago, I just returned from a trip, business trip in Mexico City, had no clue. Some friends picked me up, we went to a birthday party, and they brought me home probably after midnight, and I had no clue that my son was lying dead less than 8 miles from where I live. The next morning, my maid came in to clean my house and brought this little card that was stuck on my front door, which I didn't see. And it was a note, it was a business card from Sergeant Lampert from Homicide. And on the back, there was a message, we're trying to reach Tariq Khamisa's family. And I thought, that's kind of odd because he was a good kid. He was a student at San Diego State, worked as a pizza delivery man on weekends. So I quickly called that number, and they told me that Tariq had been shot and killed in some kind of a gang initiation. And my knee-jerk reaction was they made a mistake, that it was a case of mistaken identity. Right. So I live in San Diego. We have a lot of Hispanic people that live here that have dark skin like I did and my son did. So I thought it didn't make any sense. So I quickly hung up on him and called his home because he had just moved into an apartment with his girlfriend, Jennifer, that gotten engaged, I should say, his fiancée. Sunday morning, it was early. I thought, he would pick up the phone. Of course, he did not. She did. And she couldn't say anything. She was just sobbing because she already knew, because Homicide had already visited their home. And that's when it hit. I was in my kitchen. I lost strength in both of my legs as I collapsed to the floor, hit my head against the refrigerator. I curled up in a ball. I don't have the words to describe to you how excruciatingly painful that experience was for me. Yeah, it's the worst nightmare for a parent. He was my only son. I have a daughter, and he was a kind, generous, handsome, everything you'd want in a son. A good writer, a good photographer, loved Gandhi. Gandhi was his hero, man of peace. So he, 20 years old when he died. And I remember that the pain was so excruciating. I had my first out-of-body experience. And I practice as a Sufi Muslim. Sufism is the metaphysical arm of Islam. Used to meditate an hour a day, before I lost him. Now my practice is 2 hours a day. So I had a pretty strong spiritual foundation. And I left my body, and I believe in God. And I believe I went into the loving embrace of God. And he held me in an embrace for a very long time. I don't recall how long I was gone. And it was literally like a nuclear bomb that had detonated inside of my heart. And you can imagine you're broken into millions of smithereens that will never come back together. When the explosion subsided, God sent me back into my body with the wisdom that there are victims at both ends of the gun. And I didn't really connect because at that time I was so devastated. I wasn't thinking, I wasn't together. The only thing I could do was to call his mom. I live in San Diego, she lived in Seattle, Washington. And how do you tell a mother?
Right. So you're already struggling with that grief, and then you have to share such a painful thing, to his mom. And
And they had a very good relationship, as mother-son do, and I have a very, good relationship. My mom, she passed 3 years ago, and I still miss her. One of the hardest things I ever had to do, and she reacted the same way. Unfortunately, she wasn't by herself. She was visiting her family, and she let out this loud, piercing shriek, and I can hear it as I tell the story, and also hit the floor, and I finished very broken conversations with one of her brothers. And I called my parents, and my dad had just had a 12-hour 7 bypass surgery 2 days before Tariq died, so we couldn't even tell him.
Right.
It was a tough time for the Khamisa family. And then I called my best friend, and he said, "Don't do anything. I'll be right there with Kit," which is his wife. Mm-hmm. And Kit went to get Jennifer because she was by herself, Tariq's fiancée, and I was alone with my best bud. And he said to me, "Whoever these kids are that killed Tariq, I hope they fry in hell," because we knew there were some eyewitnesses, and so a youth gang was involved with Tariq's death. And my response to him, this is an hour and a half after I found out, that I don't feel that way. I see that there are victims at both ends of the gun. And I remember he broke down and cried. He says, "Azim, where do you get this strength? If somebody took Adam's life, which is his son, not only would I want the killer, I'd want the whole clan." I never really went there. It was months afterwards when I was spending some time in nature. I spent time with family and some friends, but in April, Tariq died in January, 3-4 months later. I spent some time alone in Mammoth. A friend of mine had a condo over there, so he says, "Use it anytime you want." And in the Sufi tradition, we have a 40-day grieving period where you're not supposed to cook or clean house. You're just supposed to
focus on grieving.
Mm-hmm. Because grieving is medicine.
Right.
I wish I've learned. It was a good adage from the Turkish tradition that he who conceals his grief does not find a remedy for it. And you're supposed to tell the story.
Right.
And Tariq died in such a complicated manner, so you have to tell the whole story. And I couldn't even say Tariq died because that was like a 2,000 ball going through my system.
Right.
It's like taking the scab off the wound. It's painful. We've all done that.
Well, and you may be afraid to kind of finalize it.
You're really not, you are so mired in grief and feel so decimated that it really stops most of your cognitive feeling. But later in life, I realized, Doug, that in every trauma or deep tragedy, there's a spark of clarity. Mm-hmm. Every saint has suffered the dark night of the soul. And that spark of clarity was this download that I made, that there were victims at both ends of the gun. Mm-hmm. And in my Sufi tradition, I was taught that the reason we grieve for 40 days is because Tariq's spirit is in close proximity of his family and friends, because you're supposed to grieve. And after 40 days, he moves to a different consciousness, because we believe there's a journey after we die.
Right.
That instead of grieving, I should do good deeds, because good, compassionate deeds are spiritual currency and transfer to Tariq's soul and provide high-octane fuel for him in his journey in the next world.
So even though he's left this plane, by doing these things, you stay connected, in a sense, to Tariq, and that helps with the healing?
Yes. I mean, even today, 26 years later, if I'm home alone, which I live by myself, I put his photograph on the dining room table. I light a candle or two or incense, have flowers there, and tell him what's going on with his foundation. And he responds back. We're on the same wavelength. So I can meditate and connect with them. And then when I was in Mammoth, this thing, which was the advice from my spiritual purpose, that good compassionate deeds done in the name of the departed provides high-octane fuel for them in their journey in the next world. Finally, I got this aha that who was the enemy? The enemy wasn't the 14-year-old gang member who killed him, because it could have been another pizza delivery man. It's very random.
Right.
But the real enemy was the societal peer pressure that forced many young men and women to fall through the crack and join lives of crime and gangs and drugs and alcohol and weapons. That was the real enemy. It happens a lot. I didn't realize how often it happens.
When you're recognizing that there's more to the 14-year-old story than that one night, that he didn't come out into the world, this killer. There's lots of experience and happenings in this kid's life that brought him to that point.
Yes, that's an excellent insight, Doug, because he had a pretty tough upbringing.
Right.
He was born to a 15-year-old. His father was about the same age and didn't want a kid, so he shunned his son every time his son approached him, and then moved away from. He was born in South Central Los Angeles and moved away to Louisiana, so his father was never in his life. He grew up, with his mom, who was a teenager too. Mm-hmm. Parenting, probably the toughest job in the world, right? If you're a parent, you get that.
Yeah, I can't even imagine.
So it was a child bringing up a child. His grandfather was involved, but not so much because he was in the military. His grandmother, his great-grandmother, which was his grandfather's mother, spent some time and reared him. And at the age of 8, his grandfather was back, had a job. He has a master's degree in urban development. He worked for the city of San Diego. Finally got his grandson at the age of 8 because San Diego was safer than Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. And Tony lived with his grandfather, who was a military man, but loved his grandson. Ples only had one daughter who had one son, so that was his full family. And Tony joined a gang at the age of 11. His grandfather really did not know that. He was angry because he didn't have a relationship with his dad. His uncle was shot and killed, his favorite uncle, when just before he moved to San Diego to live with his grandfather. And, if you look at Tony's life, a lot of violence, a lot of anger. And sometimes I think if I had grown up like Tony, maybe I would have made the same decision, because there was 4 kids involved with gang initiation, and 3 of them were 14. Tony was the guy that handled the 9mm handgun. And the gang leader was an 18-year-old who gave him the order to kill Tariq. Yeah. So Tariq was a nobody. He was just another pizza delivery man. And he fired one round, which was fatal. Sure. So when you look at the whole thing, what became clear to me is that to honor Tariq, to help me and my family deal with this in some kind of a positive manner, that I started a foundation, and it's named after him, the Azim Khamisa Foundation. Our website is tkf.org. Mm-hmm. And our initial mandate was to stop kids from killing kids by breaking the cycle of youth violence. And essentially had 3 mandates. First was to save lives of children. Mm-hmm. Important to do because we lose so many on a daily basis. I mean, the numbers are huge. Our second mandate was to empower them with the right choices so they don't fall through the crack and get involved with gangs and crimes and drugs and alcohol and weapons. And our third mandate was to teach the principles of nonviolence, mm-hmm. of accountability, of empathy, of compassion, of forgiveness, of peace building and peacemaking. I started with a very simple mindset that violence is a learned behavior. No child was born violent, and Tony wasn't born violent. But if you accept that as an axiom, that violence is a learned behavior, it follows that nonviolence can also be a learned behavior.
Sure.
But you have to teach it, because kids are not going to learn that through osmosis. Where do they learn these principles? So it was after I started the foundation, soon after I started the foundation, which was 9 months after Tariq died, so not a very long time. I had everything laid out. My background was in investment banking, in business, international business. So, I'm used to doing business plans and, working with the plan, and I put everything together. And then I thought, you know what? I need to reach out to his grandfather. There's a lot of media around it. He was the first 14-year-old to be tried as an adult in the state of California. Then when I started the foundation, did not have any animosity towards him, forgave him, reached out to his grandfather. There was more media. And my attitude to the grandfather, I met him in the public defender's office, is I'm not here screaming revenge and retribution. I'm not here in resentment because your grandson killed my son. Rather, I see we both lost a son. My son died, and you lost your grandson, who was like a son because he lived with his grandfather and calls his grandfather daddy.
Right.
To the adult criminal justice system, I can't bring Tariq back from the dead. He's gone. And there's nothing you can do to get Tony out of the criminal justice system. But the one thing you and I can do is to make sure other parents and grandparents and other young people in our community don't end up dead like my son or end up in prison like your grandson. That is something you and I can do. So I'm really here to ask for your help. I've started this foundation with this very lofty mission. Can't do this by myself. I need some help. And it behooves us to work together because it was your grandson that took the life of my son. Will you help me? Of course, he was very touched with my hand and very quick to accept my forgiveness. And the first thing out of his mouth was, thank you for reaching out to me. Ever since. Now he's Baptist from the South. He says, ever since I found out my grandson was responsible for taking the life of your son, I went into the prayer closet that maybe someday I get a chance to meet you so I can express my condolences to you and your family. So thank you for reaching out to me. Of course, I will help you. Here we are, 26 years later, together. With the grace of God, the foundation now reaches tens of thousands of kids every year. We've saved many lives. We have a safe school model, which has 4 programs for the youth. We specialize from 5th to 10th grade. Tony joined the gang in 6th grade and took my son's life in 8th grade. We also have a program for parents because with COVID, they're even having a very, very hard time. And we also have a program for teachers based on restorative practices. And we're getting amazing results. And now with COVID, we are racing to become online, which will be totally online with the whole Safe School. Some of it's already online. We also have a second site in Philadelphia. I've given over 1,000 presentations to students. I have over 100,000 letters. And what gives me hope is that not only are these principles of accountability, empathy, compassion, forgiveness, peacemaking, peace building are teachable. Our kids are hungry for them. Mm-hmm. Under the buzzword for teaching this stuff is called restorative practices. So we are essentially the poster story about restorative justice. Restorative practices is morphed from restorative justice. I've written a lot about it. I've written 4 or 5 books. Actually, my 5th book just came out. And it changed my life, but somehow I was able to find purpose through this tragedy.
Stands out to me that, all of that violence is going to be handled through the justice system. And that doesn't provide typically a restorative process for the people that were impacted by this. So family members, the people that lost, all those things, it's more of it doesn't necessarily support the practice of grieving in the way that we would want, because it's that idea of I got to have retribution to the person that harms through prison and, the sentencing. And that almost, in a sense, works against our grieving process because it encourages that retribution. I need to see this person suffer because I'm suffering. It sounds like that your ability to get there has a lot to do with the foundation that was instilled in you through your faith and your upbringing and experience and your experience with that faith. I would imagine that not a lot of people have that foundation instilled, this idea of if someone took something from you, like your son or daughter or loved one of anything, that because you almost have to go against your natural brain's instinct to go to retribution, that tit for tat. You have to consciously step in and go, no, we're not going to do that. I need to understand this situation more and find a better way. I mean, how would you instill that or help people that don't necessarily find that within their faith to get to that place of, I got to look at this grief differently than retribution or revenge. I got to find a different road to go down, this transformative road that you speak about.
You're exactly right. We live in an eye for an eye society. We are conditioned for generations, My faith had a lot to do with a download that there were victims at both ends of the gun. Because, as I said, I believe in a higher power. And sometimes as mortals, we are not capable of doing it. But I think in time you realize that there is a healthy way to grieve and an unhealthy way to grieve. I mean, we all know what the unhealthy way to grieve is, because we've lost grieving and ritual. And one of the ways I think that helped me is to have some of these rituals. They exist. Even in the Jewish faith, they have what they call sitting Shiva, where you grieve for 11 days. And there's stuff, I'm sure, in the Christian and other traditions. The healthy way to grieve is to meditate, to pray, to spend time with nature. Journaling helped me a lot. To spend time with therapy, because I think therapy is important. The work you're doing is important to, reach out to people. That you finally get that you can't bring Tariq back. Mm-hmm. That at some point for you to, I always say that you have to, the precursor for forgiveness is compassion, which the Dalai Lama talks a lot about. And with the precursor to compassion is empathy. The biggest twist, I think, is that full healing for the victim can only happen if you are able to forgive. Because if you are not able to forgive, you remain a victim. I had a very full life when my son was alive. I didn't want to go through life on crutches because I lost my one and only son. Many parents never bounce back. I've met many in the 25. I speak to adults as well. I met one father who says, Azim, how do you do it? It took me 25 years. I stayed in denial that my son had passed away. And I recognize that unless you forgive, you remain a victim. And forgiveness is something you do for yourself. The hardest part, because we are so conditioned and because we are such an eye for an eye society, the first thing you have to do is you have to separate yourself from the offender.
Right.
Leave judgment to the higher power. Tony had his journey, I have my journey. Mm-hmm. Most of my family have forgiven Tony. Of course, I led the way. But the only person that didn't forgive was Jennifer. Mm-hmm. And she was very angry with me. How can you forgive Tony? He took Tariq's life. I said, you know what? I'm going to leave Tony to the higher power. There's no escaping wrongdoing. Karma always balances. I don't want to go through life angry and in hatred and in resentment. Because if you do that, Mandela made this quote very famous, that resentment, hatred, anger is like drinking poison and waiting for your enemy to die. Right. Because it eventually, manifests into cancer and disease, because all of these are very corrosive emotions. And the second piece, which I think is as equally important, is I didn't want to go through life as a victim. I didn't want to go through life on crutches. I had a full life when Tariq was alive, traveled the world, stayed at nice places, had a good social life. And then I had no life. It literally took all of my willpower to get out of bed. And I used to travel, no problem, come flying from London, try to fly to Tokyo. I said, where did the energy go? So once I decided to start the organization, I came from Mammoth, so as to speak, from the mountain with a sense of purpose. And I wanted to create spiritual currency for Tariq so he could soar in the next world. But it also gave me purpose. By doing this work, it's a win for Tariq, it's a win for me, and it's a win for society. So you have to transmute that grief at some point, right? You need a sunset on it. Otherwise, you remain a victim. So during the grieving period, it's okay to have this victim. And I know it's a long answer to your question, but you have to go through that grieving process. You have to create a different perspective. You have to build a sense of empathy. You recognize by taking Tony's life, I'm not doing anything for me or society, that there is a better way to deal with this. And then forgiveness can hopefully manifest. And you're right, it sometimes can take months and years.
Yeah.
But the point is to understand that you have to grieve, and that you not only have to grieve, you're going to put a sunset on grieving. And that sunset, you have to try, because grief, it's all energy. And you take that grieving energy and transmute it into something positive, much like I have done by starting the foundation.
I have a question about that sunset, because what is striking to me, or what I think maybe people might say, would be that doesn't, when you're saying sunset, doesn't mean that you're not ever sad about the loss, or that you don't feel emotional distress or pain, but you've kind of put a finalization on the grieving to allow you to move forward in life and start to live whichever life that you're choosing to live after that, versus staying stuck in that debilitating kind of place. But not to say we don't stop ever having pain related to a loss, because I mean that's not really something we necessarily have control over.
Tariq's birthday was March 6th. The anniversary was January 21st. And even today, 26 years later, those 6 weeks between the 21st and March 6th are very difficult for me.
Yeah.
Because the muscle memory is there, because that shock that I had, it doesn't go away. Your body, it's a book called The Body Keeps Score. It's actually a good read that deals with what you just said. One of my books is called The Secrets of the Bulletproof Spirit, How to Bounce Back from Life's Hardest Hits. It's published by Random House in 2009. It's 30 different chapters in it. Is about spiritual resilience. In life, you're going to get problems your intellect will not solve, even if you have a double PhD. In life, you're going to get problems your hearts are not going to be able to heal. Where I am. By the same token, there are no problems that you're going to get in your life. And I want to underscore that, no problems that your spirit cannot solve or heal. And you don't have to have a faith. Spirituality and religion are different things. We all have a soul.
Which I think is an important distinction.
Yeah, it's an important thing to remember, that we don't use this faculty as much as we use our intellect. When we spend a lot of time in our heads, not all the answers are there. I would tell the kids, if you have an important decision to make, sure, nothing wrong with a PhD. It gives you more ability to do pros and cons. Mine's like a computer. And sure, you say, does it make sense? Doesn't make sense? If it makes sense, you go to your hearts. We all have a sense of what is right, just, and good. If it feels good, right, and just, then you don't stop there, because we've all done things that, that makes a lot of sense. That really feels good, right, and just, and say, why did I do that? Mm-hmm. Because you don't take the third step, which is go to the spirit and ask, is it inspiring? Will others follow my lead? And I bet to you, if you get a check in all of those three boxes, that'll be a good decision, because spirit always makes decisions that are in the highest good for you, the other person, and the universe. In the Buddhist faith, I met His Holiness the Dalai Lama in 2004. Pope John Paul invited 30 people from around the world that were involved with peace activism. A lot of them were monks and people from, amazing work were being done all over the world. I was lucky to be one of those 30. And the Dalai Lama spent 2 days with us, which was amazing. I took 9 pages of notes, and And I became very friendly with one of the monks because he travels with an entourage. And he says, in the Buddhist faith, and this is a good thing to learn to become more resilient, is in the Buddhist faith, we believe everything that happens to us, we attract, because it is about our spiritual evolution. And I said to him, I have a hard time with that.
Yeah.
Did I attract the murder of my son? I said, no parent would ever do that. He said, no, before you were born and Tariq was born, because in every lifetime, you have to learn lessons to move you towards enlightenment. And sometimes it takes 1,000 lifetimes for humans to get there because we don't learn so easily, as I'm sure you will agree.
Right.
And your lesson in this lifetime was forgiveness. And you had a contract with Tariq that he would come to you and that he would tragically die, as he did at a young age of 20. God gave us free will. You still had to make a decision between revenge and forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And you made the right choice. So your next lifetime, you don't have to lose another son. So I know this is a very evolved view.
Just a challenge for some people to wrap their head around that.
It's a very challenging. It's a very evolved view.
Yeah.
But the point of it is not everybody is dealing with the loss of a son, although some of them are. We're living with a lot of hits. Mm-hmm. In life you get a lot of hits. But if you put this mindset that everything you attract, the spiritual bullion in tragedy, you have to look for it. Because we all have a spiritual purpose. And God's way, or the higher power's way to put us on there, is to give us some hints and clues of which way we're going. That's the way you have to then look and say, why did I attract this to me? If you say, why me? That's a victim mentality. You're back to the question of why me? But if you say, why did I attract this to me? You might get different answers. And that's the purpose of this book, is to look and see, when you look at some of the hardest hits you've taken, it's probably where you've grown the most.
Oh, absolutely. And in everything that we experience, our brain spends a lot of time trying to make sense of it. And so I would and provide meaning for these experiences. And so, do I have an approach to meaning that is going to help me grow and learn and work through things, or is it going to make me suffer more? I mean, because we can come to a conclusion about what happened and talk about how there's so much hate in the world and the world's a scary place and, I should never come out of my house because, or we can look at things from that perspective you describe, and which one is going to lead us to that fulfilling life, bringing that light out of a tragic event.
Yeah, there's a great quote by Rumi. I'm sure you read Rumi. He's a Sufi philosopher, probably the most well-read poet in the Western world. He's been translated. He died 800 years ago. But one of the things he said is that the light enters through the wound. Mm-hmm. Because exactly what you just said. You have to find meaning and maybe purpose.
Sure.
I see you on your T-shirt, you're talking about resilient purpose.
Right.
And purpose is a big deal. Once you find your purpose, it wakes you up and drives you, and you move towards it. And I would say I wasn't trying to really be in social services. My educational background is in mathematics and finance. And I speak half a dozen languages. I grew up in Kenya. I went to school in England. And I had a business background, but I've done well in social services. Setting the foundation. I also teach a 4-day class on strengthen your spiritual resilience. It's actually about resilience, and I'm actually doing one on the 23rd of this month. And it's a 4-day, 4 hours a day. It's train the trainer. So I teach 3 milestone steps of how you forgive people that have harmed you, and 3 milestone steps of how you forgive yourselves, because at some level, we've all harmed.
Sure.
And this is a work that you can take. I know a lot of your audience probably is in providing therapy, as you are too, helping people. That this is a course that can kind of augment what you are doing. I've had amazing results with it, and because a lot of us are living in these debilitating emotions of anger and sometimes hatred and resentment or shame and guilt because of what we've done, and we may want to forgive, but we don't know how.
Today there was a news article about something that is very close to us, and just seeing so much anger in the community over this. Obviously it wasn't really fun behavior that this citizen was doing, but there's this uproar and anger and I want all this bad things to happen to this person, for them to get fined, and it just rooted in our society right now of this anger and this lack of understanding or lack of desire to understand. Maybe not lack of understanding, but I don't want to try to know the hurt or I always talk to people about hurt people. No one's interested in the hurt that the harmer is going through. And to some level I can recognize why it would be hard for people to do that, but in terms of a healthy, resilient society, it does no good for us to neglect the person who harms, because that will never stop the cycle. That will never stop the violence in the long run.
Yeah, and I work in prisons as well. Tony, who killed my son, is now 40, and it was released a couple of years ago. He's now volunteering for the foundation. And we just did a big piece on NPR. He and I were on the morning edition, and he's helping make sure other kids don't make the fatal mistakes he did when he was such a young man. There's a resource in prison. I mean, there's a program called LCP, which is not in every prison, but there are 3 federal prisons I speak at, Leavenworth, Milan, and Petersburg, which is a program faith-based. So every inmate has a spiritual advisor. So if you're Christian, you have a minister. If you're Jewish, you have a rabbi. If you're Buddhist, you have a monk. If you're a Muslim, you have an imam. And if you're none of that, you have a spiritual teacher. And the recidivism rate in the adult system is 2/3. But if they go to the LCP program, it's under 17%.
Wow.
So the other 83% are doing good work. And I go in there and talk about the devastating pain of violence. I talk about how they can then take responsibility for their action, ask forgiveness of the people they've hurt, and redeem themselves by helping others not follow in the same footsteps. Because a lot of young people die, and many of them have found purpose, through living. It's a resource. So I call them applied experts because they know the street. Tony's an applied expert. He knows the street. He knows what he went through, decisions he made to join a gang and take Tariq's life. And now he understands how that was something that he wishes he could turn the clock back.
Do you have any insights onto what helped him go down that road? Would you say it's related to the idea that someone forgave him and gave him the opportunity to redeem himself, or is it?
Yeah, it's a good question, Doug. Maybe I can answer it this way: that I started the foundation 9 months after Tariq died, but I recognized for me to complete my journey of forgiveness, at some point I had to come eyeball to eyeball with Tony.
Right.
Hard to do.
Yeah,
It took thousands of hours of meditation. Because at some level you have that, you want to, wring his neck because you are mortals.
Well, there's a visceral response that you can separate yourself from when you're not in front of him.
Yeah, you have to work at it. But it was a very cathartic moment. So I met him I told the grandfather I want to go visit him 5 years after the tragedy. It wasn't something I was able to do as quickly as I did meeting the grandfather. I told him I need some alone time with Tony. So we started together because as you as grandfather, I don't want him to be defensive. I have some tough questions to ask him. And then he left us, and Tony and I talked man to man. And I still remember that. That was almost 21 years ago. He knew I'd forgiven him because I'd been working with his grandfather for a good 4+ years. He knew the foundation. And his demeanor had totally changed. He was well-mannered. He was well-spoken. He was well-read. He was articulate, polite, remorseful. Didn't portray any of the typical attitudes of a 19-year-old in our society.
Right.
I wasn't expecting that. At one point, we locked eyeballs. I'm looking in his eyes and he's looking in my eyes, and we held that glance for what seemed like a very long time. And I'm looking into his eyes trying to find the murderer, and I didn't. I was able to climb through his eyes and touch his humanity, that I got the spark in him was no different than the spark in me. I wasn't expecting that. And at that point, I told him, Tony, you know I have forgiven you. When you come out of prison, you can come work with your grandfather and me. You can come work in the foundation. And when I left the prison, I clearly remember, even though this was 20+ years ago, that my stride was much bouncier leaving than the one I walked in. That forgiveness can be extremely freeing. And the preeminent thought in my head was, why did I wait 5 years? Because the release was amazing.
Right.
The next day, the grandfather called me and says, Azim, that meeting you had with Tony yesterday has totally shifted him, which was your question.
Yeah.
He said, as you were leaving, he looked at me and says, Daddy, that's a special person. I killed his one and only son. Not only has he forgiven me, he's offered me a job. I'm not worthy of it, but I'm going to work at it. And my grandfather says, he never said that to me. He always told me, Daddy, I'm not going to make it in prison. He's a good-looking young person in an adult prison. Well, you know what prisons are like. Mm-hmm. He says, after that, he totally turned around. At 22, he aced his GED, 94%, like an A+. He's close to his AA degree. He's read the Bible, the Quran, the Torah. You know, he's very well read. That meeting shifted him, and he applied himself and continues to do so. So yeah, I think my forgiveness had a lot to do with giving him a second chance. And this is what I really believe. We have a lot of resources in prison. They need, especially juvenile prisons, they need to be healing places where we don't incarcerate the kids and throw the kid away. They don't do that in Europe. I think the longest sentence for a juvenile in Europe is 5 or 6 years. You know, here we can put them away for 25 years. I mean, it's inhumane.
Right. Well, and we also maybe equate that, putting someone away for so long is going to somehow make things better for us. But typically when our brain focuses on that, we're just suffering and suffering and suffering, right? Because you're holding on to this anger, holding on to this resentment, and it's actually imprisoning ourselves, right? So we're imprisoned out in the world, And I always think one of the other things that stands out to me about these things in terms of forgiveness or not being willing to forgiveness, as if you were going about your life like your anger does nothing for him. Like it doesn't do anything to him because he's in prison. It only cripples you.
What you said reminds me of Mandela. When Mandela was released after being in prison for, 27 years or something, he forgave his oppressors, and one of the guards asked him, why did you do that? And he says, if I didn't, I would still be in prison. Right. It's exactly what you said. And so you have to recognize it's a gift you give yourself, which keeps on giving. Mm-hmm. So when you really get that forgiveness, when I first wrote my book, 98, 3 years after Tariq died, From Murder to Forgiveness, there wasn't much out there for forgiveness. You almost had to go back to the scriptures. Today, there are over 500 or maybe over 1,000 clinical studies where they've proven that forgiveness is good for your health, your joy, your happiness, and for healing. That once you get the benefit of forgiveness, it's for your own good. I mean, I just had a 72nd birthday. I don't take any pills. I'm healthy. I walk 7 miles 6 days a week.
Right.
And I don't live in this victim mentality, or I don't, live in this mentality of in hatred. And it's interesting. I might share this with you because I think it'll be relevant for your audience. Something again I learned from His Holiness the Dalai Lama, that all emotions have a frequency. Judgment is right below there with anger and resentment and hatred and guilt and shame. All of those are very low vibratory emotions. Happiness doesn't live there. Then there are emotions that have a high vibratory frictions, high vibratory frequency, like goodwill, friendship, trust, empathy, gratitude, compassion. Forgiveness is right there with love. Happiness lives there. And it's not that complicated to know. At any given moment, are you vibrating up here or down there? Now, when you meet somebody like him, he's up here 24/7. Us mortals all have a bad day. We get angry.
Sure.
I do too. And you fall off the wagon and you come down there. But I can tell you that when that happens to me, I take my 2-hour meditation, put another half an hour, and get back here as soon as I can. And having done this work now for the last 26 years, I'm spending more time up here in this high frequency emotions. And when I'm more in the flow of life, happier, I'm healthier, and I'm more understanding. I don't go through life with a lot of anger or challenges, because I can take life as it comes in a positive way.
So I'm wondering, those low frequencies or high frequencies that you are still giving, you're tending to the painful emotions, you're not trying to avoid them, that you tend to have to take them on and work through them, that we almost, or we just stay in kind of this reactive mode. Like the word that stood up in my head when you were just talking is reactive mode. If we, you have some purposeful intention about the way you live your life, that I'm not going to spend a ton of time wallowing in this pain, but I'm going to do something to get back to this higher frequency. But I also don't want to ignore or dismiss the pain, because it probably means something. It probably is trying to tell us something about what we need in those moments.
Yeah, I think you're back to that piece, is to say that you grow, from that pain. There's another good Rumi quote: "The cure for pain is in the pain." But you look at that pain in a different light. Pain is something that is not going to go away in life. Suffering is, because suffering is self-inflicted.
Yeah.
But if you have this mindset that we talked about earlier, is why did I attract this hit? You get very different answers, because I truly believe that hidden in every hit is spiritual bullion. But you have to look for it. And if you are spiritually resilient, you can find treasure in your hits. But you have to have that mindset. So when you are going through a hit, if you go back and say, well, why did I attract this to myself? One of the things that helped me a lot, and I still journal, is to look at it and see, what is the universe trying to tell me? How do I change my behavior? What is the gift here? No pain, no gain. We learn through our pain. And when you even look at your life and see, there's a great book called the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. And my first book had a title, Azim's Bardo. They talk about bardos. And I don't know, there's several hundred pages, probably several pages in that book called Bardo. And I must have read those 100 pages or whatever 1,000 times when Tariq died. And the Bardo comes from the Buddhist Tibetan concept. It's two words, bar and do. Bar means it's a transitionary stage. Do means you're upside down, or you feel thrown.
Yeah.
You're going through life, right? I mean, there are many bardos: birth, adolescence, graduation. You get your job, you get fired, married, sometimes divorce.
Yeah.
There are many bardos in life where you're feeling upside down. But the most supremest of all bardo is death. And the Buddhists believe that if you spend your lifetime working in developing your spiritual resiliency, that when you die, your spirit is fluctuating at such a high frequency that you can step out of samsara. Samsara is a cycle of birth, death, rebirth, into nirvana, which is when you are united and off the treadmill of samsara. Bardos are to be espoused, because all the bardos that you have gone through is where you will have gone through your quantum leap. It's very true to me, because I found my purpose, and I love the work I do today, and talking to kids, teaching nonviolence, teaching forgiveness, and creating more peace in the world is a lot more fulfilling, saving lives of children, than in my investment banking days, where it was all about money. This is about saving lives, much more fulfilling, much more important. And I think we all have the need to give to the community. We all have this, one of the things I love about America is we have such a robust nonprofit sector where people give of their time, of their treasure, of their talent, because the sense of giving is a very fulfilling thing. We all need it. And I thank my son that he put me on my spiritual purpose, because it's been a very fulfilling journey.
Absolutely. And so you use the word journey. I'm curious, is forgiveness, I wouldn't think is a static event. Like just do it and it's done, that it is a journey. And so if that is true on your journey, did you hit speed bumps in the road on that forgiveness journey, and how you got back on that road, fixed the tire if it hit a pothole or whatever, so that you can kind of continue to...
Yeah, absolutely. Forgiveness is not an event. It is a journey. It's peeling back the onion. And it's really a habit. Mm-hmm. As I said, if you are, I don't know if drivers in Ohio are as bad as Southern California, but if, we have terrible drivers here. I always tell them, if somebody cuts you off, don't give them the finger, give them a blessing.
Right.
Because they'll make you feel better. Yeah, they'll make you feel better. Who knows? They might be rushing to the hospital because their mother or their wife is in bad shape. So for me, you get sad. The road bumps are this period between Tariq's anniversary and his birthday, which was March 6th. It's a difficult time. You get sad. I get melancholy, or you cry. I mean, I never used to cry, when my son was alive. Now I do. And tears come very easily to me because I miss him a lot. And had I been at the seat of the crime, you put your body between your son and your bullet. You don't think about this stuff. You just do it instinctively. And what helps me is then to meditate and count my blessings. And this is something we don't do very often. We sometimes stay stuck in all of the negative emotions.
Well, recognizing it.
Yeah, and I have a good friend that tells me, count your blessings, Azim. I'm healthy. I am on my purpose. The foundation that's doing amazing things. I've written 5 books. I teach forgiveness. I've helped many kids and also adults. That I feel that I'm so blessed. So when you are going through those road bumps, my big advice is to count your blessings. I have a daughter. I have 3 beautiful grandchildren. They're smart, bright, good-looking, everything you want from them. I have a good relationship. So there's much to be thankful for and much to be in gratitude for. And gratitude, again, is this high vibratory emotion.
Sure. No. And so practicing those high vibrating emotional practices, right? I wanted to just kind of end this on a quote that we recently saw in I think it was one of your newsletter emails that I thought was really good. I really liked it. It said, spiritually resilient people resist despair because deep down they believe that there's a treasure lying somewhere beneath the ruins and they are willing to look for it. And so I think that talks about the journey, right? The journey of, not letting the opportunity go to waste, from this experience, not make this experience wasteful. So I appreciate you taking your time. I know there's probably elements of healing from retelling your story, but I appreciate talking about your experience and your story and just really sharing, the good work that you're doing. And we will definitely let people know about your upcoming course. And I would definitely recommend, taking that opportunity if you can. There's a healing experience as well for the participants, right? So, which I think is a healthy thing.
I can tell you stories after stories. Most participants get a breakthrough.
Yeah.
It's a very intense workshop. It's 4 days, 4 hours a day. Used to be a 2-day live workshop, but I didn't think anybody wanted to sit in a computer for 8 hours. So I put it in 4 days. But it is definitely going to be a very transformative experience, especially if you're dealing with it. And even if you are in providing services to victims or offenders, you can use this work. Thanks for doing that. And the details are on my website under the events page.
Yeah, and we will.
It's coming up on the 23rd, a couple of weeks from now.
Work quick, but these are things that you do ongoing as well, I would assume.
Yes, this is my third one.
Yeah,
and I do 3 a year, maybe 3.
Great.
So if they stay tuned, they can sign up for my newsletter on my website. Then they'll automatically get advice of the events. Yeah, I love doing it because I've had amazing results with it. And after all, who can't use forgiveness, right? Of others and themselves. I mean, it's.
Can't think of a better time than now to do something like that. So I appreciate it. I think it's an important topic to bring to our community, and I'm expecting people to really get something out of this, and it's an important topic. So thank you. I wish you luck, and good luck with your COVID shot, your vaccine.
Yes, I'm actually at noon today is my second shot. So I'm glad we're doing this before, because I told the second shot is a little tough on your body.
Yes. So I appreciate it. Thank you.